Hey guys, Mr. Bowman here. Today's learning objective is in green, and we are learning to use relative risk to solve probability problems. And I suppose the key word for today, it's going to be relative risk, and I'm going to get probably a bit more into the video. I'll explain what relative risk is, but before we do that, we do have to explore something called absolute risk. And that's just a fancy way of saying the probability of a certain event. So that's just a fancy way of saying the probability. So let's have a look at an example. We're going to go through each of the steps for these. So 689 students on a school event took a sunsafe survey. Of these students, we know the following: 25 wore sunblock and got sunburnt, 359 wore sunblock, and 285 got sunburnt. And the questions are, how many times more likely are you to get sunburnt if you chose not to wear sunblock? And what other factors could have impacted whether or not a student got sunburnt? And obviously that's the wrong spelling of other. So the key giveaway that it's a relative risk questions. How many times more likely? That for me is always the giveaway. It's going to be something to do with relative risk. So the first part we need to do is we need to find out the probability of certain events. So the risk, the probability of something going wrong, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be comparing from the question whether or not you wore sunblock or not, and if you were sunburnt. So it's what's the probability of getting sunburnt if you wore sunblock, and then if you didn't wear sunblock. So those are the two things we're trying to figure out, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. So let's draw a table on the far side over here. So let's say sunblock, not sunblock, and then we'll do B for burnt, and then not burnt. And then from there, we should be able to find out the probability. So we know that there were 689 students in total, so 689. We know 25 wore sunblock and got sunburnt, so that's both of them, so that's 25 in here. 359 wore sunblock, so that's the sunblock total there, 359, and 285 got sunburnt, and that would be the total down here. From there, we should have a look. Well, can we figure out the rest of our equation? So we've got 25 divided by, 359 minus 25. That tells us that there were 324 people that wore sunblock but didn't get sunburnt. We can also figure out this number here, which is 285 minus 25. That gets us to 260. We can figure out the total people who didn't wear sunblock by subtracting. So 289 minus 359, that gets us to 330. And finally, we know we can figure out this number, that's 70, and over here would have been 404. So that's our table. We then need to get amongst and try to calculate the absolute risk. So just to recap what we're trying to compare, so let's change pen colors for this. So we'll go into the yellow pen. So we are trying to find out how many times more likely are you going to get sunburnt if you chose not to wear sunblock. So what we need to find out is what's the probability of getting burnt if you wore sunblock, and what's the probability of getting burnt if you chose not to wear sunblock. So from our table, we need to go ahead and find out the probability of those. So don't forget our approach, F over T. So how many people, so we're looking at burnt given you wore sunblock. How many people wore sunblock? We only care about those 359 people. So 359. Of those 359, how many got sunburnt? Well, it's just 25 of them. 25. And if you put that in your calculator, you get 25 divided by 359. That gets us to 0.0696. And apologies about the pen not working too well, but that's 0.0696. So hopefully that's clearer. And then we've got the same step. So of the people who didn't get sunburnt, so let's do our F over T. F over T didn't get sunburnt. That's these 320 people there. So we only care about them. Of those 330, how many people got sunburnt? 260 of them. 260. And we can find the probability of someone getting sunburnt if they chose not to wear sunblock. So 360 divided by 330, that gets us to 0.7879. And both of those numbers were rounded to 4 dp. So that's the first step of a relative risk question, is finding the absolute risk of the two outcomes, sunburnt whilst wearing sunblock or sunburnt whilst not wearing sunblock. From there, the next step, we need to find the relative risk. And here, the relative risk, just as a generic formula, it's always equal to the biggest number divided by the smallest number. And those relate to the two probabilities you calculated above. So what we're going to do is we're going to go the probability of getting burnt whilst you're not wearing sunblock divided by the probability of getting burnt whilst you were wearing sunblock. And so 0.7879 divided by 0.696. That comes to 11.32. And once you've done that, so let's change pen colors for the next step. We now have to interpret, what does that number actually mean? Interpretation. And so currently we're still working on this first part here, interpretation here. So a student at the school event is 11.32 times more likely to get sunburnt So a student at the school event is 11.32 times more likely to get sunburnt if they did not wear sunblock. They did not wear sunblock when compared with those who did wear sunblock. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's our statement. That's the relative risk. How many times more likely are you to get sunburnt if you chose not to wear sunblock? And then the last question here, this is normally what makes it a merit or an excellence type question. So let's change pen colors. Just looking to add in a bit of context from here. So number 4, what other factors could have impacted this? So obviously you'd want to explain this in full sentence form, but just thinking out loud, there are tons of other factors. So it's the clothes that the students wore could have impacted there. So if some people were in like NBA singlets, their shoulders and their arms are far more likely to get sunburnt than those who chose to wear, for example, a school hoodie or something like that. Activities undertaken. So, for example, maybe if they went to a water park, if you were out and about, maybe you're on the hydro slides and you're exposed to the sun all day, you are far more likely to get sunburnt than someone who is maybe just sitting inside in the spa or maybe in the cafeteria, something like that. And there could also be other factors in like the bigger, wider thing. So there could have been more like socioeconomic factors. Sunblock is actually quite expensive, so students who come from families who may not be able to afford it, unfortunately, they may have to go without. And so there could be a whole bunch of other factors. So obviously you'd want to explain those last points in sentence form. So guys, hopefully this video does take you through and run you through how to calculate and interpret the absolute risk of certain events happening. I would encourage you, make sure you get the example down, make sure you understand how the wording works, in that area and make sure you understand how to calculate everything. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Now let's get into heaps of practice.